Hello everyone and welcome to the live webinar on climate change organized by AXA as part of its 10th CR Week 2020. Thank you for joining us from everywhere in the world. Climate change, why companies must react fast? This is the question we would like to explore during this webinar. I'm Annette Burgdorf and I'm very happy to be joined by Isabelle Bergeron, Head of Communication at the AXA Research Fund, and Olivier Boucher, climatologist, Deputy Director of the Institute Pierre-Simon Laplace and member of the AXA Research Fund Scientific Board. They will tell us about science and policy interactions as the key to fighting climate change. I will first interview my guests and I will take then your question. You can send through from now on, and we will aim to answer as many as possible at the end of the discussion. Also, if you need to drop off for any reasons, we will be circulating a recording of the entire webinar in the coming days for you to rejoin. Hello, welcome Isabelle and Olivier.
Hello.
Hello. Isabelle, so you are head of communication at the AXA Research Fund, which has been created in 2008. Thank you for coming. Dr. Boucher or Olivier, you are a climatologist, a specialist on atmospheric aerosols and how they affect meteorology and climate. You received many awards, such as the Outstanding Young Scientist Award of the European Geoscience Union in 2004 and a Prize for Innovation in Meteorology in 2015, and many others, but the list is too long to just mention everything. You have been heavily involved in the International Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, and you're a Deputy Director, Institute Pierre-Simon Laplace, and member of the AXA Research Fund Scientific Board. Long titles.
Too long.
Yeah. So, Olivier, my first question is for you. Science is a lever to act on global warming. This has been mentioned several times already this morning. How can science provide concretely the way forward on the issue of climate change?
Right. So science has been very clear on the risk associated with climate change. Even since the 1970s, of course, now the risk is much more pressing. We know much more also, the knowledge basis is much larger, but the main message has remained the same. We emit a lot of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, which causes global warming. This is well observed, well modeled, well understood. And we know that there is a range of impacts associated with global warming, such as more intense heat waves, heavy rainfall, drought, inundation, sea level rise, etc. The science also can help us to make projections into the future. So we know that the future is not cast in stone. We know there is still a range of options for the future. Probably the best we can achieve is about 2-degree warming as compared to 1850, which is a reference. But in sort of worst case scenario, it can be much larger. We're probably on track for, at the moment, for 3.5 or 4-degree warming in 2100, and it could be worse, of course.
With dramatic consequences.
Of course, yeah, which is why we have to avoid it. And the science also tells us that there is a lot of inertia in this climate system. So we know we need to act now to have a chance to limit global warming in say, from 2050 to 2100, which means that there is some more warming to come, inevitably, and we have to adapt to it. We know how to adapt, so we have that capacity to adapt, so we need to use it and adapt to global warming. But we also need to reduce emissions as much as we can in order to limit the warming in the second half of the century to this, say, 2-degree warming objective. So to come back to your question, what is the way forward? I'm a climatologist, but I also have colleagues who are more economists. So we know what is the way forward in terms of decreasing emissions. We know we need to phase out coal, for instance, which is a pretty inefficient source of energy. This has a lot of very high carbon content. There is some room for gas and oil, but we know it also needs to be ramped down. We know we need to seek energy efficiency everywhere we can. We need to electrify mobility. We need to make building more efficient, and so on and so on. And of course, you want to start from the easiest and then go to the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. But there is a key concept which the science has brought forward in the last few years, which is carbon neutrality. We know that to limit global warming, there is a certain amount of carbon dioxide that we can emit in the atmosphere, and that amount is fixed, which means that basically you have, when it's used up, you have to be carbon neutral, zero emissions, and every sector has to should have that goal.
Just, I want to come back because you said, okay, we know scientists know about climate change since the 70s. So, and today we say, really now we have to act. But I think we say this since 10 years, 20 years. So, and now we say, how is it, how can we be just serious about this? Now we have to act. No, we have 10 years before it was the same.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's not too late. Okay, it's the same message. It hasn't changed. It's not too late to act, which is the good news. But of course, it's been repeated for a long time. But it's not easy to change. If it were easy, I think society would already have done it. So we know it's difficult, and we have to tackle that difficulty.
Okay, Isabelle. So Olivier just mentioned that the science has been very clear about the issues on global warming and has long been sounding the alarm. So how is AXA, through the AXA Research Fund, engaged on climate issues?
Yes, so Olivier was also mentioning that science was behind a lot of technical innovations that are needed, for example, to mitigate the impact of climate change. But at AXA, we believe science also has a key role to play in infusing the public debate. So AXA leadership has always been strongly convicted that science has a key role to play in tackling the big challenges that the society is facing. As insurers, we manage risks, so it means we have to know them, to anticipate them, to assess their impact, and whenever possible, to try to mitigate or prevent it. And there are scientists that are doing exactly the same thing. So in 2008, we decided to launch the AXA Research Fund, which is a unique philanthropic initiative which aims at supporting innovative, excellent science, but also disseminating this knowledge to make science useful for the most people and to make it infuse decision-making. So those are really the two pillars.
Can you give us some figures about what you have achieved and perhaps some projects?
Yes, absolutely. So in 12 years, almost 12 years, we have committed 250 million euros, which have been supporting 650 projects. And climate and environment represent a third of those projects, the other being on health and socioeconomics. So really a big component of the money we decided to commit to support science. And if you want, I can give you an example of one project, for example, that shows the alignment of the science we support with our purpose, which is to protect what matters, which is actually the people, their assets, and their activity. So, for example, one researcher that we support, Professor Hanna Zinge, holds an AXA chair on climate risk. And he has established that by the end of the century, half of our beaches may have disappeared. So there's urgent action needed here. So right now he's working with the local governments to make the better modeling, the better assessment, to quantify the risk and to make the necessary adaptation measures in order to protect the communities. So you see here, this is something that, of course, is interesting for us as an insurer, but it will benefit all the community.
And what are the main topics you support or you tackle?
Okay, so there are several aspects about the climate change issue. We try to understand the different causalities also and the different forms of impact. And that goes also on the impact on the biodiversity, the impact on health or the food or the pollution, things like that. it's really a broad array.
And how do you communicate about what you do? I think communication is really key.
Yes, absolutely. Communication is the second pillar of our strategy, and really we spend a lot of effort of this. You were mentioning the IPCC, and we know for a long time they've been very active, very involved in making sure that all the science was available in a way that's accessible and that's actionable for decision making. Well, at a very humble level, we try to do the same thing. We really encourage our researchers to get their science outside of the lab, because that's key for us to make the science useful. So there are many ways in which we do this.
And I think to make science useful, but also to make people adhere to the solutions and to explain it, to better understand this is really important. Olivier, how can we act to make the most of our knowledge?
Right. I mean, the science has been very good at alerting to the problem. It has also gone a long way to bridge with policymaking through UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the IPCC report, which supported, and that led to the Paris Agreement. But we also need to translate the science into solutions. Solutions for everyone, solutions for people. I mean, we've seen government, but increasingly we are working with businesses, with companies. And here again, we can differentiate between adaptation. We will need some level of adaptation into the future, and we do a lot of work with the companies to help them translate climate projections in some useful information for them, make sense of the uncertainties. I mean, there are a lot of certainties, but there are also some uncertainties about the future. So we work with them to translate that into something useful. And then when it comes to mitigation, to emission reduction, then again, there is some advice that we can provide. We work increasingly with some companies on also the offsetting issue, the compensation through carbon sinks in forest and other places where you have to make sure that these carbon sinks stay there for a long time. You don't want the carbon to go back into the atmosphere. We work with aviation as well to understand how we can avoid some of the climate impacts. So clearly, yeah, there is a lot to do for the companies, and we see with AXA they take this very seriously. I mean, this event is one evidence for that. In terms of course, their own emissions, but also the way they can influence their customers or their providers, and also through investment. And then we come back to the issue of financing and the socioeconomics, which is a little bit far away from my own subject, but which is also very important for climate change.
But from your point of view, what are the limits or the barriers to the scientific solution to everything?
Right. You were asking why we've been alerting for 10 years and not much happened, and that's indeed because there are many barriers in the system, whether they're legal, technological, socio-economical, social, or even behavior. I mean, we're just human, so we know we have habits. It's difficult to change these habits, and I think science should work on these barriers, try and understand them, try to see how they can be overcome.
And for example, from science to policy, isn't it, as you said, we give advices, isn't it a bit frustrating to just give advices, not to decide? Because politics takes decision and...
Yes, but that's why I think we have to differentiate the role of the scientist and the role of the policy making. The scientist can be here in an advisory role. We have to present the evidence, present the option. In the end, society and policymakers have to make the decision, because they have to balance a number of things to make the right decision. But of course, it's tricky, it's complicated, it's the world we live in.
Okay, Isabelle, I would like to ask you the same question. How do we act to make this happen?
Okay, so yeah, it's really about communications and engagement, because yes, as I was saying, we need to get that science out of the lab to make it useful. So really, we at the AXA Research Fund, we dedicate a lot of effort to offer to the scientists that we support the opportunity to make the science accessible, which means understandable and visible to a broad audience. So we give them communication opportunities and occasion to exchange with other experts, not only from the scientific community, but from the industry, decision makers, members of the civil society as well, because indeed we are convinced that this is key. And there are many ways we do this. We even start sometimes with media training for young researchers. We leverage all the communication capacities from AXA, from their institutions, from trustable media partners. We organize events, and we really like to get researchers engaging with non-scientists, and they really like it a lot. Also, they always express it's beneficial for them.
And what do you think, what role should play the private sector alongside with the public sector?
Okay, so yes, there's a complementarity between the private and the public sector in terms of funding. For example, oftentimes the private sector can take more risks, at least that's what we do. We are open to support science in new avenues that can create some very innovative approaches. We are giving a lot of independence to the scientists we support, and sometimes public fundings come on top of this. So that's for the funding part. We also encourage a transversal approach, multidisciplinary. So for example, we think that social science are very important to tackle the climate issue. But then, again, this is communication and collaboration, because we really think that with the current stage of the climate crisis, we need both the public and the private sector to work together. We need the academic world and the decision-making to work together, because the best science, if it stays in the lab, it's not as impactful, and the best decision maker will need some science-based facts to take the right decision.
And Olivier, we are observing when watching the news a rage-filled new movement against science, but also against liberalism, against masks, against everything. People are really, or some people are climato-scepticals, against vaccines, everything. How do you see this movement? How do you see? Because we listen a lot now in the news about the COVID-19 crisis. Scientists are always on the news. They give advices. We listen to them. But more and more people are getting, I don't know, critical against this.
That's right. It's concerning, and we do see that happening on a number of subjects. It's not easy to tackle, I would say. Of course, we need to inform. We need to make the science transparent, and scientists have a duty to make the science more transparent, more open access, reproducible, and we take all these steps. But we also need to inform the public, and to do that, we really need some leverage. We need to use teachers, we need to use media, we need to use the private sector, so as to reach a larger number of people. And when you think of it,
should be a big coalition.
Yes, I think the more you go in the same direction, the more effective it is. But at the same time, it's a subtle balance, because there are also uncertainties. Science is progressing through challenges and questions, so we need to achieve that balance between making sure that what's really wrong is mentioned as being wrong, but also not hiding the uncertainties on the science itself.
It's a bit the same question, but it's about the fake news. What role should scientists play in this overwhelming ocean of fake news?
Right, we had a lot of it with climate skeptics. I think they tend to be a bit less vocal now. I think we've sort of won that battle, at least in Europe, I would say, maybe not everywhere in the world. And but it's been very time-consuming. It's taken a lot of effort because, of course, you're sort of facing some lobbies. That's their job, whereas my job as a scientist is to do the science and then on top of that, communicate that science. So it's tricky, but as I said...
So you feel disturbed in your work by
this? Of course, yes.
To answer to fact.
Exactly. But we tend to rely more on teachers, on schools. We try to put some of that into the curriculum, so you get a broader uptake in society.
Okay, would you like?
Yeah, I think
exactly. What is the role of a company fighting against fake news and to communicate on that?
Yes, I think we obviously need to give voice to share the science, but also to explain that the scientific method, what the scientific method is about. It takes some time, it takes some iterations. There's not one single voice. There are several hypotheses with risks associated. So I believe that we also need to progressively, and when I say we, it's not just AXA, it's the media, and every time there's an opportunity to talk about science, we need to talk about the way science is made and not just call on science when there's an emergency.
Because science is very often very complex. And I think this is the opening to fake news, because people want perhaps some easy answers to complex things. And size.
That's true, but at the same time, if you come back to companies like AXA or others, their business rely on science, so they cannot rely on fake news. So that's also where the hope is coming from, is that you need some robust science to make robust decisions, and there is a lot of stakeholders in society where science is in their interest.
And science communication can do a lot to make this science understandable and relevant to people.
But it starts already, this communication, very early at school. As you said, we need teachers, education of our children. Just a question about the COVID-19 crisis. What can we learn from this crisis to act on the climate change? What is the link?
It's an interesting analogy, because with COVID-19, you see that the response had to rely on science. And the countries who have ignored science probably have done less well than the other countries. But in the end, it's the policymaker who have to make the decision, because they have to balance health versus education versus economy. And with climate, it's similar. You have to balance the health of the planet with the economy and with other things. And again, we have this role of the scientist versus the role of policy making. The other interesting analogy with COVID-19 is the fact that you have to act ahead of time. You have to act at some point if you want to avoid the hospitals to be flooded with patients in, say, 2 or 3 weeks' time. With climate change, it's the same, but it's a much longer time horizon. You have to act now for avoiding the worst in 50 years from now. So that's maybe where the analogy stops, and what maybe you have to learn on, again, maybe turn to social sciences also to help you try to convey that message.
Okay, I would like, just because time is running out, with one question for both of you. Are there any opportunities in the fight against climate change? Just to finish the debate on that, perhaps a positive note.
Well, I think they are, and they should be, and we need to make sure that they are more, and that we turn the risks into opportunities, because that's the way we can fight climate change. It's by creating some incentive, not just by having a negative message, but really by having some opportunities.
Would you like to add?
That's fine for me. We'll always be here to support those opportunities and to help amplify them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming and sharing. Our webinar on climate change is over. We have seen, I think, that companies have a crucial role to play in the transformation of our models towards a sustainable economy, to a sustainable model. They have to take the challenge take up the challenge to, by improving its practices and reducing its impacts on the environment. But we need what we have heard at the beginning of the first webinar. We need to accelerate on the ecological and social transition. I think we have also seen that AXA Group has already put in place a robust strategy on climate through different examples, partnership with the ONG WWF, the business unit AXA Climate focusing on deep adaptation needs, the AXA Responsible Investment Strategy, and right now the AXA Research Fund supporting science solutions. So I hope you perceived this webinar as a moment of fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for listening. It was a pleasure being with you today. Thank you again. See you soon. Bye-bye.